Hi, I'm Beth Rooney, and I'm here to talk to you tonight about how a buyer's agent gets compensated. So I'm going to break it out for you and whiteboard it out. I'm going to talk a little bit about where the money comes from and the contracts that are involved and all that kind of thing. So when a seller goes to sell their house, it's very typical that if they hire an agent, they sign a listing agreement. That listing agreement is between the seller and the firm that listing agent works for. Okay? And that listing contract or listing agreement is going to have a total commission, and it's also going to have how that commission is to be split between the listing agent's firm and the buyer's agent's firm. Okay? So I'm just going to give you an example. This can vary in a lot of different ways. But let's just say it was a 5% commission. Sometimes it's 4%, sometimes it's 6%, sometimes it's 7%. But in my example, we're going to give an example of a total commission being 5%. Now that commission can be split any way the listing agent and the seller agree. So that might be that the listing agent's getting 3% and they're offering the buyer's agent 2%. They can split it 50-50. They could make it, if it's 6, I've seen contracts where it's 6% and the listing agent gets 4 and offers the buyer's agent 2. It's all over the map. But let's just say in this example, they split it 50-50. So each firm is getting 2.5% of the commission. The commission is charged at the end of the transaction when they've successfully consummated a sale. Okay? So that's the seller. As a buyer, you should also be anticipating signing a contract. Okay? And that contract is going to do a couple of things. The contract is going to tell you how much your buyer's agent total commission is. And so your buyer's agent may be typically charging 2.5%, maybe they charge 3%, maybe they charge 2%. But your contract between you and your buyer's agent will say what that total amount is. Okay, so in this example, let's just say that the buyer's contract is saying that the buyer agent is expecting a commission of 2.5. Now, this works out great when you are working with a buyer agent, you're looking at properties that are on the MLS, because on the MLS, the listing agent advertises exactly what is being paid to the buyer agent. So in this case, if this was a listing that had 2.5 being offered out to the buyer's agent, MLS makes that public. You are working with a buyer's agent, your buyer's agent is expecting 2.5%, and that 2.5% is being covered by the seller based on the contract that they have with their listing agent. Okay, so your contract is going to do that. It's going to tell you the total amount. It's also going to tell you where those funds are coming from. Okay, so the first part of it is what's the total amount. The second part of the contract is the source of that commission. Now, I just gave you a really clean example where the source of commission was from the seller per MLS. Okay, so that might be what you decide on. So in my other example, if that listing agent was only offering the buyer's agent 2%, there's a 0.5% gap. Okay, so the buyer's agent can take some of the money from what's offered on MLS. Then they can also go to Mr. and Mrs. Seller and say, okay, thank you for the 2% that you offered through your listing agent. But at the time of close, I'd like an extra 0.5% to be paid from the proceeds of the sale to compensate me the difference that's not being offered on MLS. Okay, so that's an option. And a third option is that the buyer can in fact pay it. So if, for example, you're looking at it for sale by owner and there is no compensation being offered, the buyer's agent could go to the seller and say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I know you're not offering any compensation or you're not on MLS, but at the end of the sale, I'd like you to pay me my 2.5%. Or they could say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, we're going to be looking for a check for 2.5% of the total sale, the proceeds of the sale, 2.5% at the time of closing. And you can oftentimes roll that into your closing costs. So the majority of buyer's agent's compensation is paid by the seller based on their contract they have with a listing agent. Now, from time to time, there's an exception, but that is why you as a buyer should have a contract with your buyer's agent, because it spells it out exactly how much they are anticipating getting paid and what the source of that payment is. So there are no surprises. So if you are working with a buyer's agent or somebody that's showing you property and you haven't reviewed a contract, that to me is a big red flag. You really should be in the habit of having these conversations early with your buyer's agent so that everybody's on the same page. Any more questions, hit us up. Thank you.